Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Invest Power series. I want to talk about diversification today because I've been asked quite frequently about whether I should diversify or should I still continue to purchase, say for example, a property in the same type of location. So that's a pretty common question, and I think the answers and the responses will be kind of polar to the degree. Because first of all, you got to think about whether you want to diversify just within property or whether you want to diversify within other asset classes, like shares, for example, or in other words, if you're looking at the total asset diversification perspective. And if we just narrow it down to property, should you be looking at diversifying into different states? Should you be looking at diversifying into different type of security types, like, houses, apartments, townhouses, for example? So all great things, all great questions to be thinking about, and that's why I thought I want to touch a little bit on that today to give everyone some guidance on what my thoughts are in relation to diversification. So fundamentally, I think you need to first of all ask yourself the question, why do you want to diversify? Okay, so that should be the number one question you ask yourself. Is it about risk mitigation? Are you actually try to spread the risk accordingly to different states, different type of properties to actually lower the overall risk portfolio? Or is it because you're not confident about that this property is going to perform to the level of your expectation? That's why you want to be able to diversify. Okay, so a lot of it comes down to how confident you are in relation to the asset that you purchase and what your expectation of it is to do, in terms of meeting your expectations, whether that's capital growth, whether that's cash flow. Okay, so a lot of people, when they're unsure and there's always that uncertainty in front of it, that's when they look at diversifying. Okay, so fundamentally, you come back to the question, why am I diversifying? Because ultimately, let me ask you this question. If you know a guaranteed way to make money, then wouldn't you do it over and over again, right? So if you have a sure way of doing things, and that's generating a certain outcome for you, then of course you would do the same thing over and over again, expecting the same outcome. Okay, so if you got a confirmed way of being able to generating the same result, and you're confident about that, it's going to perform the way that you expected, then sure, you probably don't need to look at diversifying. However, a lot of people who is unsure and cannot guarantee that result, or because of that uncertainty, or because of their nature in terms of their risk appetite, then they probably want to think about diversifying to the point where they have multiple type of different assets across different type of suburbs, ranges, so that way, on an average, say some properties probably doesn't go up as much. Okay, well, fair enough. Well, in general, the other properties will still be able to perform, and therefore the average and the overall portfolio will be able to go up like that. Okay, so that's, I guess, fundamentally the idea of diversification. Keeping things all property, what are some of the diversifications that you can do in property? So first of all, you can diversify with different locations. Okay, so you can diversify into different suburbs within the same state. You could probably buy something. For example, in my scenario, I bought a unit in Hornsby, and I also invested a unit out in the west towards Granville. Okay, so therefore, that's diversification in terms of location. Different locations will have different type of performances. So obviously, you want to understand that when you're diversifying, what are your expectations with these asset classes? Another type is to diversify with different type of asset type, or I should say like houses, townhouses, or units. So all my personal portfolio are units in Sydney, and I got all my investment in Queensland are all houses as such. So that is one type of diversification. And the reason why I want to go for houses, it's not just purely for diversification purposes, but because my budget was able to reach to the level where I can buy a house. So, and there's going to be more value add that I can do later on down the track. So I thought for that price, I can actually get a house. Why not? Okay, so so that for me, we can diversify based on suburb within the same state, or we can diversify through different type of states. So in this case, Sydney versus Brisbane. New South Wales versus Queensland. Okay, so in terms of diversification, you do need to be aware that the security type in each of the state will perform differently. A unit in Sydney, for example, will be okay, will be acceptable because we're all used to high density type of living. However, if you buy a high density unit in Brisbane CBD, as you probably would have figured out today, the rental vacancy is over the roof. The past performance for the last few years in terms of high density units in there is not great. Okay, so be careful about why you're diversifying into that type of asset classes. If you are looking at it, make sure you do full due diligence to make sure that before you pull the trigger, you understand why you're buying this type of security, rather than just go, oh, I've bought houses and now I just want to diversify for the sake of diversification. Okay, so that's another important factor. So you can look at diversifying based on locations, based on states, based on the type of security, houses, units, and townhouses. Okay, so it's all personal preferences in that sense. And then diversification will also be dependent on your resources. Like I always stress, fundamentally ties back to the resources that you have, your borrowing capacity, as well as the cash, the equity that you have. There's no point in talking about diversifying into buying a $1 million house if you cannot even borrow $400,000, for example. Okay, so know what your resources and your capabilities are. And then on that basis, you can think of a longer term strategy. Okay, if I'm able to buy 3 or 4 houses, or I've got budgets to be able to invest into 3 or 4 different type of properties, do I want to basically have them all invested in Sydney, or do I really want to spread the risk and have different type of asset classes across different type of states, and in order to basically diversify the risk? Okay, so something to think about yourself. All right. So that's all I want to touch on. It's a very high level conversation, I know, but again, this is a topic that will be very, very different for each and every individual, okay? Because it's heavily geared towards what your risk appetites are. Some people have a very high risk appetite. They'll go, I'll go full in on one location, maybe Bondi, something like that, eastern suburbs in Sydney. That's fine. As long as they can sleep at night, that's okay. However, I would say most of the people would probably want to spread their basket or eggs in the basket a little bit more. So in that sense, you would want to have a think about, what do I think is the most suitable, what would be the most suitable diversification strategy for me in that kind of scenario. Okay, I'm Dave from lendpower. Thank you for watching another episode of Invest Power series. I'll see you again next time in another Invest Power series video.